Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael McCurtain. I'm the Skillnet manager here with the Limerick Chamber. I'm delighted to have Jane Mitchell here with us today to go through her webinar on talent management and succession planning. Jane has a vast number of years' experience as a leader, as a talent strategist, as a coach, as an organization development and training professional, and has worked with multinationals here in Ireland, in Europe and the US. This webinar will last approximately 40 minutes and there will be a Q&A section at the end. And I would invite anybody with any questions to pop it in the chat and we will go through in due course. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Jane and let's see how we get on.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So you're welcome, everybody, to our webinar today. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So just give me a sec to get up and running. And Michael, you might just confirm that you can see my slides.
I can indeed, yeah.
Great. So I'm delighted to be here with you today. As Michael said, to give you an overview of my background, I've worked in HR for nearly 20 years, mainly in the medical devices manufacturing sector and mainly in talent management roles. I run a consultancy company called Integrum, and I also work for another consultancy company called Teneo Strategy. And the focus today is going to be around talent management and succession. I have prepared an agenda. It will take about 30 minutes, maybe 25 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for your questions. So I have about 15 slides and a short video to share with you today. So I'm going to start with the context for managing talent, and then we'll talk about talent management as a business discipline, as opposed to a HR practice, of which it is both. We'll talk about the steps in the talent management process and also about engaging and retaining your staff. And I've taken a particular perspective, I suppose, on talent management today. Some of you are very experienced HR professionals who've worked in this field for a long time. Others maybe not as experienced in this space. So I've kind of taken a position in the middle. So hopefully, if I don't cover something that you were particularly interested in today, then we can facilitate that in the chat. So we'd be more than happy to do that. So as I said, I'm going to start with what's happening today. And we're seeing a lot of information in the media around the Great Resignation. And we're seeing that in our organizations too, where we're seeing a lot of movement in the market, and sharing some data on the screen from the US. And this is causing us, I suppose, challenges in our companies, as we've got people moving out of our organization potentially, which is leaving some gaps in roles which are critical to the success of our businesses. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. But it's not all bad news. I suppose some of the good news is here in Ireland, our CSO numbers will indicate that our participation rates in the workforce are up. So it isn't really the Great Resignation is causing people to leave the workforce. They're just moving around the workforce, which we did expect to happen as a result of the last 2 years of the pandemic. People have stayed in roles who may have moved on or been ready to move on during the pandemic, but due to the lack of security in the market and the uncertainty in the market, folks decided to stay put, and we're just seeing a bit of that movement now. So we'll talk a little bit about what we can do about that from a succession perspective, but also from an engagement perspective. So starting, I suppose, where I see talent management sitting in the organization. And as I mentioned already, yes, it's definitely a HR practice, but also it's a strategic business imperative. And it's something that's really important to deliver business strategy in our organizations. So when an organization comes up with a business strategy, which does tend to be shorter in time frame than it may have been previously, due to the changing nature and the fast-paced nature of the world. But talent management practices are a key part of delivering those business results. And being clear about the skills and capabilities we require as a business in order to deliver that strategy is crucially important. And that must be done at the top table. So if you work in a very large organization and you're working in a talent management role, or you're executing on talent management practice further into the organization, it needs to start from the top. The investment needs to be coming from that top table. The importance of talent management as a business discipline is really important. If you're working in a smaller business and you're sitting at that top table, well then, you have a much better opportunity to keep that on your agenda and place an importance on that and invest in talent management practices. So we can see the cycle of talent management practice here in the center of the screen. We have a tendency sometimes to focus on some elements more than others in talent management practices, and they can often be around acquiring talent and deploying it across the organization, but maybe not as much time in planning, developing, and engaging that talent. And unfortunately, then we see the outcomes of that, which is often that we don't see the results from a business perspective because we're not taking a holistic approach. So I'd like to share a really short video with you now of what that looks like in practice. So just give me one moment while I share my video. It's going to be about 3 or 4 minutes. I'm just going to unshare for one moment because I need to make sure that the sound button is ticked. Oh, it is, great. So Michael, if you can't hear it, you might give me a shout.
If you look at a competitive advantage that a company truly has, it's really only the ideas, the ingenuity, the passion of its people, because everything else can be matched. I believe that the CFO and the CHRO have to be so close. Their agendas have to be intertwined. So one of the things that Graham, our CFO, and I have done is we've ensured that we have a key finance person from his leadership team sitting on my HR leadership team, and a key person from my HR leadership team sitting on his finance leadership team. We also make sure that we have regular catch-ups, both with each other and with the CEO, to ensure that we're looking at business strategy in totality. How do we want to deploy our investments into certain countries' markets, into certain categories, but at the same time seeing if there's organizational readiness. Because if you invest into countries and markets and categories, but the people are not ready, there's not enough talent there, there's not enough capability there, we will never see those investments being turned into reality. Doing the strategic investment in capital, in financial capital and human capital at the same time is really important. When we have defined our key strategic levers for the year, which are the 5 or 10 or 15 roles where the biggest impact of value creation in the business could be seen? And then we use analytics to see whether we're putting the right people into those roles. So for example, we were looking at stubborn cells, parts of the company where we haven't seen the traction and performance we would like to see. And there's been just stubbornness for those results to change. And then when we see the talent that we're putting into those roles, the teams we're getting ready to look at those challenges, how equipped are they? What's their level of readiness? What's their level of capability? What's their level of experience? What's their level of passion and perseverance to change that? So we look at all of those human dimensions through the data analysis we have, and look at the business challenges. So we're able to then say that this team created a value of 100 million euros. So we're able to link the appointments and placements of talent with the actual value creation that's happening in the business. Increasingly, I find that we have to be far less hierarchy conscious in the way we think. So many of the times, the value is being created in roles that are probably 2 or 3 clicks below the CEO. In Unilever, we're creating multifunctional, empowered teams, which are actually the front-facing teams, looking at a particular category growth in a particular country. And then in many cases, you find that the person in the country handling the P&L of hair might not be, very senior in the company in terms of hierarchy, but is the most important person to make, or the most in that most important role to create the value creation as part of one of the key strategic thrusts. Most of the measures that you see HR teams looking at are very internal measures, okay? What's the bench strength we have? What is the number of succession people we have on a talent slate, or whatever it is? They're very internal measures. They don't tell you what difference it's making to the business. We are, for example, number 1 employer of choice in 44 of the 52 markets we recruited. Great. Again, it's a number I like because it's externally measured. It's measured by Nielsen Universum. So it's external measure, which is great. But with the power of data and analytics, I'm able to connect the dots and show that in markets where we are more attractive, we are attracting the right kind of people. Our costs of recruitment have fallen. Our conversion rates have gone up. Our recruitment yield is better. So suddenly, I'm able to show the business that we're saving 15 million euros because of the sheer strength of our employer brand in some of our key markets. So those are the kind of conversations that HR leaders must hold themselves and their teams accountable for.
So hopefully that short video brings it to life a little bit in what it can look like in an organization when the talent management strategy is really embedded in the business strategy from start to finish, and where you can demonstrate the value of talent and talent development in the business results. We'll move on now and step through the process. So I've created kind of 4 main steps around which I think the development of talent and the management of talent really centers around. And the first one we look at is the systematic identification of capabilities and key positions. So identifying where those core capabilities need to be in the organization. We'll talk about developing the talent pool, both from a performance and a potential perspective. The development of the learning architecture to support that, and then continually engaging that talent with the organization. So in step 1, and this is a really crucial part of any talent management practice, understanding what core capabilities are required for us in our company in order to deliver on our business strategy. So what differentiates us from our competitors? What are those capabilities, those competencies, the knowledge and the skills that need to be different in our organization? Can we highlight those? Are we really clear about what that looks like and how that's going to support our business strategy, not just for today, but potentially for the next, 3 to 5 years. So it's less about getting straight into looking at the people we have in our organization, we'll come to that. But really taking an approach where we step back from that and look at what those core competencies and capabilities are. Some of those we may have in the organization already, which we'll look at next, but we may need to go to the external market for other capabilities and competencies that we don't currently have. But being really clear on those from the outset is an exercise that sometimes organizations don't focus on. We tend to focus very much on the talent pool that we have, rather than lifting ourselves out of that and connecting back to that business strategy. And what is it we really need to be doing well in order to deliver on that strategy? So once we have that clarity, we look at our talent pool and who are we looking at within our organization. So it depends. Sometimes we'll just look at a leadership layer first, or if we've been doing this for quite some time, we'll start to make our way down through the organization as we get more sophisticated at the process. If we're an organization that requires a lot of technical competence, we may look at leadership and technical roles separately. Whichever way we're going to do it, the first thing we need to do is look at the potential that we have in our business today, whatever we decide that talent pool is. And we look at three aspects in order to ascertain potential: aspiration, engagement, and ability. So I'm not going to read through all of these because you're going to get the slides afterwards and the recording. But really what we're looking at is we're trying to establish from our existing talent pool, do we have folks that have the ability to deliver at that next level that we'd like them to deliver at, emotionally and cognitively. So some organizations will assess this through maybe 360 feedback, or other organizations will use psychological profiles or assessment centers to do this. The other two aspects around aspiration and engagement, they involve having a conversation with the employee, the person who is in the talent pool and who potentially has the potential. And this really involves making sure that your managers are trained and equipped to have these conversations. There is a reluctance to have the conversations, and sometimes the skills aren't there, and they really need to be developed. And the reluctance, I think, sometimes comes from people managers having a fear that if they ask people about where they see themselves in the future, if they have a discussion about this, that they're setting expectations that they're going to appoint them into that particular role. So the discussion needs to be really quite transparent, but the discussion definitely needs to happen. And what I have seen sometimes in organizations is where the manager will do this assessment by themselves. They won't have the conversation with the individual. They will highlight them as having potential for a particular position, and the person may not be interested in taking that particular career path. You've had their name in a succession box for quite some time, and when it comes to appointing in the position, the person isn't interested. So a really crucial part of this part of the process is making sure that your managers are trained and confident in having these discussions with their folks. They're not promising them these positions in the future, but they're just having a transparent conversation about where they want to go with their career. And that gives us a real insight into the type of potential we have in our organization, but it's also quite engaging for our employees to have those conversations with their managers if they're done right. So we have a picture now across whatever that talent pool is in your organization of what that looks like. And so along with our performance assessment, you know, we map that into some sort of a talent assessment tool. I have chosen a 9-box talent grid because I'm most familiar with that. Some organizations use a 4-box, which takes out, you know, the moderate layer in the center. And there are other tools out there. I suppose the value of using a talent assessment grid or tool is that you get an overall picture of what your organization looks like. The downside of using a tool like this is there is the potential to label people in a particular box. And so that's something that you really need to be mindful of. But really what a tool like this does for us is we get an idea of what potential looks like, having had those conversations. We make an assessment around low, medium, or high potential, either for a leadership role or maybe a more senior technical role, or you might have a career path in project management as an example, depending on what your organization does. And along the bottom, we look at performance. In my experience, the best way to look at performance is to take, an average of performance over maybe the last 3 years. It's unfair, and this is just my opinion, to take, a view of performance maybe just on last year. Someone might have had a bad year performance-wise for personal reasons, or they may have been working, for the wrong manager or been in the wrong role. So taking kind of a broader look of performance is really important. So as I said, this gives us a picture of where our talent is in the organization. And it also takes some of that subjectivity away from a manager making an assessment because they like somebody. So it takes out a little bit of bias, I suppose. That's another upside of using an assessment grid like this. It also gives us a picture of where the talent is in the organization. And so it's not all about high potentials and stars. We also need to look at how many core players we have, how many potential gems we have for the future. So in each box per se, there's value in really looking and seeing where people are and how that is working for us in delivering our business strategy. Once we've done that, we can get into our succession planning and management, really. The first step of that is often to create a succession plan. And this is quite blurred, you're not supposed to be able to see it. It's just showing you that we'll have some sort of a worksheet. In some organizations, you'll have invested in a system that will do this for you and will spit out a report for you, which is fantastic. It takes some of the labor out of it. In other organizations, you can use a simple Excel spreadsheet and you'll download one of those from numerous sites on the internet very easily. But what we're really looking at here from a succession perspective is for those key positions that we've identified, those areas that we feel are really crucial in delivering our business strategy. Do we have potential incumbents to put into those roles if somebody, left the organization or was promoted through the organization? Do we have somebody who would be ready now to take over that position, be ready in the next year, be ready in the next 2 to 3 years? It's difficult to plan, much further than that. But certainly we should have a sense of where maybe we have a gap for one of those key positions that's really crucial to deliver our business results. So we may have somebody who's ready now, but we may have no pipeline after that. And so we might be thinking about a strategy to get some, junior folks up through the organization, maybe through an apprenticeship scheme or through a graduate program or something like that. So it may not be that we don't have an immediate seat to fill. It may be further back that we're seeing some gaps in the organization. And this is a strategic planning process. So really important, to really think about maybe not just the next 12 months, but further on than that. And if you're in a situation at the moment where, you've lost a lot of folks, you might think, oh my Lord, I don't need to be planning for 3 years' time. I need to be planning for today. You'll often be in that situation. And so in order to really get ahead of that, today is the time to start thinking about the back end of that plan also. So we're looking at readiness here. We're also looking at maybe, potential development gaps that we see. So somebody might be meeting kind of 75% of the criteria for succession, but we may see a gap. And now is the time, to start planning for that. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Just want to call out a couple of things that are really important here too. This can really be important in feeding into the hiring that you're doing today. So when you're hiring maybe a production team leader for your manufacturing floor today, you might see that you have a gap in 2 or 3 years' time for successors for an operations manager role. Now is the time to start looking at those candidates and seeing, is there potential for the future? So you're hiring not just for today, but you're also hiring for potential for the future. So that's something that, can really help you keep informed for what you're doing in your hiring plans for today. Secondly, that this is an organization-wide strategy, and I think this is really important. The succession plan and the talent assessment gives you an indication of what your organization looks like broadly, whether it's a small organization or much larger. And sharing talent across functions is a really great way to keep knowledge within the organization, to keep folks engaged. So when we see people being promoted into roles, not just within their own function, but we see so many opportunities throughout the organization, that's very engaging for people who work in our organization, and is likely to really help us retain our staff. So it's not just about looking at your own function, but also really trying to embed that culture of sharing talent across different functions, because that really is a win-win for everybody. And lastly, I suppose, and this runs throughout the talent management and succession processes, and this is an area that I think organizations can often, certainly in my experience, fall down. How are we rewarding performance from a leadership perspective? So we often have slogans like, people are our greatest asset, and, we're all about the talent, which is great. But when it comes to it, these types of activities often, take a back seat when it comes to when people are stretched from a workload perspective. And often we don't reward our leaders in the organization for developing talent. And if we're not rewarding them either financially or promoting people who develop talent through the organization, or calling them out in different forums, then we're less likely to get leaders to buy into this process. So that's a really key factor in ensuring that your leaders get behind your talent management program. And then we move on to, we have our talent pool. We've identified, where we have potential for the future. We've got a succession map. And there'll always be quite a bit of movement around that, but we have an idea of what that looks like. We now need to support that with what I call a learning architecture. And there are 2 or 3 different elements that are really important here. Not complex, but really, really important. So the first piece is around having a robust individual development plan for everybody who's on that succession grid. I mean, ideally we have one for everybody in the organization, but at a minimum, a really robust individual development plan. And put very simply, what does that look like? It looks like no more than 2 or 3 development options in any given year. Any more than that, we're not really likely to be able to execute on them along with our workload. It looks like making sure those development options are really linked to our organizational goals. It's motivating and challenging for the person who's on that succession plan. So really keeping them engaged and challenging them, testing them too through the development plan. And it's really tied into their own personal and future career goals. So that's a really important part of it also. They should own this plan. Yes, it should be facilitated by the manager, but definitely ownership should be with the individual. And often what we'll see on these development plans might be a focus very much on training classes, or, you know, going straight for an external provider in delivering that development. And although that's really great and it should be part of the development plan, and I do myself out of a job in a lot of aspects when I hand out these nuggets of advice, but it also should be focused on other parts of development that can be accessed in the organization. And so we use a model like the 70-20-10 model, which has been around for a very long time and is still really useful today. And the reason for that is that learning retention and impact is much higher when that learning happens on the job and through development experiences, because we're living those experiences in our everyday work lives. And so the impact, as I mentioned, is much, much greater. So our talent should be developing through a model where they're gaining those experiences through their existing roles, and also being challenged in areas like stretch assignments, potentially being, you know, mentored or coached by more senior folks in the organization, or sometimes by peers. That has become very popular, peer-to-peer mentoring. And then absolutely there should be an element of, you know, webinars, online training, external training classes where they get exposure to different types of thinking and other organizations too. Sometimes where we see difficulty here is the manager may not always be, the people manager who's facilitating this process may not always be very knowledgeable on you know, how to facilitate the individual development plan. And again, I come back to, we need to train our managers, make sure our managers are really, I suppose, au fait with models like this. The reason that they put lots of training courses into the individual development plan, can sometimes be laziness, but more often than not, it's because they're not really sure where else they can access development in the organization. So there's definitely a job here around guidance and support for the manager in really thinking outside the box in what would be the most meaningful development interventions for the folks that they have on their teams, and then rewarding them for spending time having these conversations and helping the individual execute on the development plan. So that's the first part of the process really, and the kind of more technical part of the process where we, you know, have our talent pool, we're identifying where that potential is in the organization, and we're developing that talent. And lastly, I suppose we come to retaining that talent. So we've identified these folks in our organization that have the capabilities and the competencies that we need to be successful. How do we hold on to those folks in an environment like we're operating in today? And so we really need to go back and have a look again at some of those engagement factors that have changed slightly, definitely for sure, you know, over the last 2 years. That the hybrid model and remote working definitely comes into play. But also there are core engagement factors that are really important when we think about retaining those folks that are really crucial to the success of our organization. So I have two pieces of data and research that I want to share with you today. The first one comes from Gallup, and it's based around their extensive research in engagement. And they talk about this engagement triangle, where it starts with really fulfilling those kind of basic needs in the organization for individuals, and really building on that through people's individual needs, their need to be part of a team, and also their need for challenge and growth. And so what does that really look like in practice. So they outline 12 kind of key areas. Their website is really great, gallup.co.uk. They have a lot of free resources on there if you're interested in this area and doing a little bit more research. So first of all, they talk to us about people needing the resources and materials to do their job, and understand what's expected of them. So I think we see the performance management process come in here, performance review, setting goals. There's not much point in, really trying to engage people up here around their growth for the future if they don't have the tools and resources to do their job, or they don't know what's expected of them today. We move on then to areas like, helping people use their strengths, so helping them identify those strengths, having those conversations with them around, how they can build on areas that they've already had success, recognizing them for good work, and having those development conversations and putting an IDP in place for people to focus on their development. That, it turns out, is really important from an engagement perspective. Also, being part of a team, if you've got team structures, they're really engaging for folks, and you can really leverage those in order to really retain people in the organization, specifically around, asking people about their opinions. So really helping them feel that they're part of the broader organization and that they count. Using the team structure, so having teammates that have credibility and are committed to good quality work, and understanding the mission and purpose of the organization, really important when engaging our teams. And lastly, then we get to having conversations with me around my progress and how I can learn and grow my career in this company. All of these really require the people manager to be sitting down and having conversations and engaging, not just on a to-do list in their one-on-ones, but also around all of these different aspects of people's roles in organizations. Also, I wanted to add another piece of data, I suppose, not just to take a one-dimensional approach, and I'm using a survey, a study which was done in 2019. And this really also looks at very similar factors, which was another reason I thought it was interesting. So a lot of what they came up with in the survey were around similar factors that Gallup point to. And you can read through those yourselves, and you certainly get a chance to look at the slides afterwards. But again, it's around understanding the mission of the organization. So pull me in and tell me about this organization and what we're about. And it doesn't matter whether you're making life-saving medical devices or whether you're in, the dog food business. People want to know that they're part of something greater, and they want to understand the purpose of their organization. Again, they want to know, what's expected of them so that they can fulfill those expectations. They want to be able to use their strengths. They want to work as part of a team, and they want to be challenged and to be able to grow in their roles in their future careers. And again, it's important to note here, this doesn't always mean vertical growth for people. Sometimes it's expanding their knowledge in a particular area and being a technical expert, but not necessarily moving up through the organization. So managers need to have those good quality conversations in order to be able to figure that out. So lastly, I suppose, and this is my last slide, just trying to pull out the critical elements from a talent management and succession perspective. Really, tying talent management practice back into the strategic plan, the business plan, and reviewing that on a regular basis. So in the world that we're operating in now, that needs to happen at least twice a year, if not quarterly. And, having a pretty slick process that isn't really very cumbersome would be really crucial to making that successful. Otherwise, people will find that quite difficult. As I've mentioned, the people managers are really the differentiator in my experience. So I've worked in organizations where we had really great systems and templates, but where we didn't engage our managers and where we didn't reward our managers and help them to understand that this was a key part of their role, that's really where we didn't see traction. So I think that's a really crucial part of this process. Organization design can come into play also, and I know we haven't talked about this already, but if you're working in a larger organization, having very clear career paths for folks who don't want to move vertically through the organization helps to provide that growth, for those folks. It also helps us to be in a situation where we don't promote technical people into leadership roles because it's the only path for growth. And we see that sometimes, where if the only way for me to grow my career in an organization is vertically, then I may take that path, even though that's not really where my strengths are. And the organization might want to retain me, so they may put me into a leadership role because my performance from a technical perspective was really good. And then we end up with people managers heading up functions that's not the best place for them, and it's not the best for the people who work for them either. Development planning is a crucial part of the process, as I've talked about quite a bit. And then connecting people back to the mission and the purpose of the organization is really important as well from a retention perspective. So we are about 10 past 12. So I've gone a little bit over in what I said I would do from my content, but hopefully you found that hit the mark for you in some way. If not, we'd love to hear some of your questions if you have some. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Michael, you might let us know if we have any questions in the chat that maybe we could talk through.
Yeah, thanks a million, Jane. That was fantastic. Slides are very informative. A big thing I kind of took away from it was the transparency people managers need to have with their employees. And it's something I suppose I look back on in my own time. I might have been a great whatever it was, but I wasn't particularly trained or a great people manager. So I was doing a lot of form filling for the sake of form filling and not seeing the bigger picture. And I suppose this is something that I think we all need to look at. And I suppose my function can help managers develop the capabilities around that leadership piece as well. And if anybody needs to speak to me, we have huge opportunities in leadership and management and people management, whether it's a short course, long course, or in between. So it's massive. And I suppose that conversation piece that needs to be open and transparent with your staff is critical, I think.
Absolutely.
So I have a couple of questions. Michael, could I ask if you could present the potential to utilize graduate programs, I suppose, to recruit and develop and nurture new talent? Have you any comments around that?
Yeah, I think it's a really great way to think about filling your pipeline. So thinking about programs like graduate programs or apprenticeship programs, back to work schemes where you're maybe bringing people in at a more junior level, but you're really building your pipeline, for the next maybe, 3 years. It's important to have a structure that you can develop people through, but it is a great way. So if I take a role like, engineering, for example, and I know it's a very broad area, but it's difficult to find engineers in the market, be they software engineers, mechanical engineers, manufacturing engineers, and it has been for a number of years. So at some point we have to think about, we're dipping from the same pool. Can we think about taking a step back and even starting with, an intern program or a co-op program, where you're bringing people in at that level. You're engaging them from the universities. They're doing their placement with you. They're familiar with your organization. maybe they do their final year project with you, and then you have a connection with them, and then you reach out to them, when they're graduating, and potentially offer them a position on a graduate program, and you develop them over a 3-year period, and then they go into a junior engineering role. And so if you're able to invest in that type of a program, it's a really great long-term strategic approach to building talent in the organization, for sure. And very similarly with apprenticeship programs too. And there are loads out there now. They're really quite popular for a very good reason. They're a really good bet from an investment perspective, but they do require some work along the way, and you do have to give these folks time and a structure, but they are really a great way to fill your pipeline long term, for sure.
Super. Jane, in regard to any courses, techniques, or books to aid anyone looking to harness or expand their knowledge in regard to people management, would you any comments around that?
Wow, yeah, I mean, there's loads, I suppose. Maybe we could follow up afterwards. Like there's lots of really great sites where there are free resources, sites like Mind Tools, or, sites like that can be great. The Gallup, as I mentioned already, is a great site. CIPD is a great source. If you're a member of CIPD, there's a wealth of knowledge, on their website, and lots of recommendations in their books and the publications that they put out. Harvard Business Review as well has some really great articles, which can lead you into podcasts and lead you into recommendations for books. So I think there's lots of free resources out there, and then you can get to the point where you can pay subscriptions and that for some of those publications that can really help you in the long term, for sure.
Yeah, and just I suppose additionally as well, there's a big focus with Skillnet Ireland on micro credentials as well. So I suppose my role can help, I suppose, part fund some of those micro credentials, so you or your staff don't have to take 9 months, 12 months, 24 months out to get that kind of skill set. We can do it over a number of weeks or a number of days as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have another question here. What part does the performance management process play in talent management and succession planning?
Yeah, a huge part. It's an integral part of the process. Being able to engage people, as we mentioned already, setting goals, helping people understand what's expected of them, really important from an engagement perspective, but also, setting people up for success and really seeing, how they can perform on the job. Having insight into their performance over a period of time is really important from an assessment perspective, and looking at them for the future. And the IDP process, that development planning process, is a key part of the performance management process or system. And that in itself is, really integral to talent management and succession. So I would say, yeah, it's a really important part of the process, for sure.
I think that's it in terms of questions.
Great.
Thanks a million, Jane. It was great.
Thanks for having me.
We'll send out the recording and the slides. In due course, you'll also get my contact details should you need anything from my side. And that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Okay. Best of luck. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.